This story delves into complex themes of crime, justice, and moral compromise. Listener discretion is advised. What if the very foundation of justice was a lie you were forced to tell? What if your entire career, your reputation, your future hinged on you convincing 12 strangers of an innocence you knew deep down didn't exist? Imagine standing before a jury, your voice steady, your arguments meticulously crafted, painting a picture of reasonable doubt, all while a chilling truth gnaws at your soul. A truth whispered to you in confidence, a truth that would shatter every belief in fairness and accountability. This isn't just a hypothetical. For David Miller, it was the suffocating reality of his life, a secret he carried like a lead weight in his chest, a secret that began with a man named Robert Vance. David Miller was a legend in the legal world of Cedar Creek, a small town nestled in the heartland, where everyone knew everyone, and a murder was an earthquake. He wasn't just a good lawyer. He was the best. His closing arguments were masterclasses in persuasion, his cross-examination surgical. He'd never lost a major case, a fact that both fueled his ambition and in the quiet hours haunted him. People said he could charm a confession out of a statue or talk a judge into retirement. But even legends have their breaking points. They're moments where the carefully constructed edifice of their lives threatens to crumble. For David, that moment arrived the instant Robert Vance looked him dead in the eye, in the sterile confines of the Cedar Creek County Jail, and confessed. Not with remorse, not with regret, but with a chilling, almost indifferent candor that froze David's blood. "I did it, Mr. Miller," Robert had said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Every single thing they're accusing me of. I killed Emily Hayes." The words echoed in David's mind even now, weeks later, as he sat alone in his opulent office, the city lights of Cedar Creek twinkling mockingly outside his panoramic window. Tomorrow morning, he would deliver his closing argument in the trial of Robert Vance, a case that had captivated the nation. Emily Hayes, a beloved local librarian, a beacon of kindness, had been found brutally murdered in her home, her life extinguished with a violence that shocked even the most jaded among the town's residents. The evidence against Robert was circumstantial but damning. His fingerprints on a discarded coffee cup near the crime scene, a history of erratic behavior, a vague threat made against Emily during a minor dispute at the library weeks before. To the public, Robert Vance was a monster, a quiet man who harbored a dark, unspeakable rage. To David, he was a client who was unequivocally, irrevocably guilty. The ethical tightrope David walked was razor-thin. Attorney-client privilege, the sacred vow. He couldn't reveal Robert's confession. It was a bedrock principle of the legal system, designed to ensure everyone, even the most reviled, had access to a defense. But knowing what he knew, how could he stand there and argue for this man's freedom? How could he look Emily Hayes' grieving family in the eye, knowing he was about to orchestrate a legal maneuver that would set her killer free? The sheer weight of it was crushing. He felt like a blacksmith forging chains for his own soul. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on his desk. Sarah, his wife, radiant and smiling, their two children, Lily and Ethan, bright-eyed and innocent. They were his world, his reason for everything. He built this life for them, a life of comfort and security, powered by his relentless pursuit of legal victories. What would they think of him if they knew? Would Sarah, with her unwavering moral compass, ever look at him the same way? The thought twisted in his gut. He picked up a legal pad, scribbled notes for his closing argument. Asterisk reasonable doubt, lack of direct evidence, character assassination by the prosecution. Asterisk the words felt hollow, a performance, a grand deception. He was a master of the craft, capable of weaving narratives that swayed juries, but this time the narrative was a lie, and the truth was a venomous serpent coiled in his gut. The prosecution, led by the zealous district attorney Jessica Chun, had presented a compelling case, but it lacked the smoking gun. No DNA, no eyewitness. Just a tapestry of circumstantial threads that, while strong, could be unraveled by a skilled hand. And David Miller's hand was the most skilled in Cedar Creek. He had already poked holes in the timeline, questioned the reliability of witness testimonies, and cast shadows on the police investigation itself. He'd even hinted at an alternative suspect, a fleeting figure seen near Emily's house that night, a narrative he knew was entirely fabricated, a ghost conjured from his legal brilliance. He remembered the first time he met Robert, a man of average height, unremarkable features, eyes that seemed to hold a dormant sadness. He worked as a night watchman at the local factory, a solitary existence. When the police brought him in, he'd seemed bewildered, almost resigned. David had taken the case because, like any high-profile murder, it was a career-defining opportunity. He saw the challenge, the chance to once again prove his unmatched prowess. He hadn't anticipated the confession. He hadn't anticipated the cold, hard knowledge that would strip him of his professional detachment. "Why me, Robert?" David had asked after the confession, his voice barely a whisper, hoping for some flicker of explanation, some shred of humanity. Robert had just shrugged, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "You're the best, Mr. Miller. I need the best." It wasn't a plea for help. It was an acknowledgement of David's skill, a transactional statement. Robert knew David would fight for him, not because he believed in his innocence, but because it was David's job. And that, David realized, was perhaps the most disturbing part of all. Robert wasn't asking for justice. He was asking for a loophole, a meticulous dismantling of the truth by the very system designed to uphold it. A sudden sharp knock on his office door startled him. He looked up, his heart pounding. "Come in," he called out, his voice betraying none of the turmoil raging within him. His junior associate, Mark Johnson, a bright-eyed young lawyer fresh out of law school, entered clutching a stack of files. Mark admired David, almost idolized him. David saw his own younger self in Mark. Ambitious, idealistic, believing in the purity of the law. Mark's presence always felt like a silent accusation now. "Everything good, David?" Mark asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "You've been in here for hours. Big day tomorrow." David forced a smile. "Just fine, Mark. Just going over the finer points. Making sure we leave no stone unturned." The lie felt like ash in his mouth. "You're going to nail it," Mark said with genuine conviction. "Jessica Chun doesn't stand a chance. You've torn their case to shreds. Robert Vance will walk free." The words, intended as encouragement, felt like a judgment. Robert Vance will walk free. And David Miller would be the architect of that freedom. The weight in his chest intensified, threatening to suffocate him. He nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Let's hope so, Mark. Let's hope so." Mark left, oblivious to the storm brewing behind David's composed facade. David stared at the files, at the meticulously organized evidence, the carefully crafted defense strategy. Each page was a step closer to setting a killer free. Each word he would utter tomorrow would be a betrayal of the truth, a perversion of justice. He stood up and walked to the window again, looking down at the quiet, unsuspecting town. Cedar Creek, a town that believed in him, that trusted him to uphold the law, to protect the innocent. Tomorrow he would do the opposite. He would protect the guilty. He would twist the truth until it was unrecognizable, all in the name of a principle that now felt like a cruel joke. He closed his eyes, picturing Emily Hayes's face, vibrant and kind in the newspaper photos. Then he saw Robert Vance's emotionless stare. The two images clashed in his mind, a silent scream against the injustice he was about to unleash. He had built his entire career on winning, on never backing down. But what if winning meant losing himself? What if this victory, the crowning achievement of his career, came at a price too high to bear? He opened his eyes, the decision already made, the path already laid out. There was no turning back. Tomorrow David Miller, the legendary defense attorney, would stand before a jury and argue for the innocence of a man he knew was a murderer. But as he prepared to deliver the performance of his life, a chilling question began to form in the deepest recesses of his mind. What if Robert Vance's confession wasn't the only secret he was keeping? What if the truth David was so desperately trying to bury was merely the first layer of something far more sinister, something that would not only unravel his career but tear the very fabric of his reality to shreds? The trial was just the beginning. The real horror was yet to unfold. The trial was just the beginning. The real horror was yet to unfold. The fluorescent hum of the holding cell was a stark contrast to the elegant wood paneling and hushed whispers Michael usually associated with his profession. He sat across from David Miller, the man accused of brutally murdering Emily Roberts, a vibrant young architect. David, despite the gravity of the charges, exuded an unnerving calm, his eyes a placid blue that betrayed nothing. "Mr. Miller," Michael began, his voice measured, "we need to go over everything again. The prosecution's case is strong. They have a timeline, a motive, and they believe they have your DNA. David merely shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement. I told you, Michael. I was at home, alone, and I never touched Emily Roberts. The name hung in the air, cold and heavy. Emily Roberts, found in her upscale apartment, bludgeoned to death. No forced entry. The police theory. A crime of passion, likely committed by someone she knew. David Miller fit the bill. They had dated briefly, a tumultuous affair that ended just weeks before her death. The motive, according to the prosecution, was rage over her moving on. Michael pulled out a thick file. Detective Robert Johnson found a strand of hair in Emily's hand. Preliminary analysis suggests it's yours. And there's a witness, a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who claims she saw you arguing with Emily outside her apartment building the night of the murder. David's placid expression finally cracked, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Mrs. Peterson is a busybody. She probably saw someone who looked like me. And the hair? That's impossible. I haven't been near Emily's apartment in months. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They're trying to frame me, Michael. Someone is. Michael studied him, searching for any tell, any sign of deceit. David's eyes were clear, his posture relaxed. Too relaxed. There was an almost practiced air to his denial, as if he'd rehearsed it countless times. It was this unsettling composure that first planted the seed of doubt in Michael's mind, a seed that was now rapidly taking root. Who would want to frame you, David? Michael pressed, trying a new angle. Do you have any enemies? Any business rivals? Anyone who might have a grudge against Emily? David scoffed. Enemies? Everyone has enemies. As for Emily, she was a sweetheart, but she was also ambitious. Stepped on a few toes to get where she was. Maybe someone she crossed came back for revenge. He paused, a strange glint in his eye. Or maybe, Michael, it was someone who wanted to make sure I took the fall. Someone who knew about our past, knew it would make me the perfect scapegoat. The conversation continued for another hour. A verbal dance where David offered vague denials and deflected every probing question with a calm that bordered on arrogance. He maintained his innocence with unwavering conviction, yet offered no verifiable alibi, no alternative suspects, nothing concrete to dismantle the prosecution's growing mountain of evidence. He just insisted he was home alone and that he was being framed. Leaving the holding cell, Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He'd defended countless clients, guilty and innocent alike, but David Miller was different. There was a void behind his eyes, a disturbing lack of genuine emotion that sent shivers down Michael's spine. It wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. It was an insistent whisper in his professional ear. This man was lying. The next few days were a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and strategy sessions with his small team. His junior associate, Sarah Chan, a brilliant young lawyer with an encyclopedic memory, found herself increasingly frustrated. Michael, she said one evening, poring over crime scene photos, the blood spatter patterns, they're inconsistent with a single attacker, and the weapon, a blunt object, was never found. Detective Johnson says it was probably wiped clean and disposed of, meaning David could have done it, Michael replied, rubbing his temples. The weight of the case was already pressing down on him. Or meaning someone else was involved, Sarah countered, her brow furrowed. Or that the narrative isn't as straightforward as the police want it to be. The prosecution is leaning heavily on the emotional motive, the jilted ex-lover. But what if it's not that simple? What if Emily had enemies we don't know about? And what about the security footage from Emily's building? It's grainy, but it doesn't clearly show David entering or leaving at the time of the murder. Michael nodded. I've seen it. It's inconclusive at best. The timestamps are also a bit off, according to the building manager. The deeper they delved, the more questions arose, but none of them pointed definitively away from David Miller. The prosecutor, Jessica Adams, a formidable opponent known for her sharp intellect and even sharper courtroom presence, seemed to have an airtight case. She painted David as a possessive, unstable ex-boyfriend, driven to violence when Emily decided to end their on-again, off-again relationship for good. She had witnesses who testified to David's jealousy, his temper, and his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to Emily's death. One afternoon, Michael was reviewing David's financial records, a routine part of any defense. David was a successful software engineer, seemingly well off. But as Michael scanned the statements, a peculiar detail caught his eye. A series of large unexplained cash withdrawals over the past 6 months, totaling nearly $50,000. Not unusual in itself perhaps, but the timing was odd. They coincided with the period leading up to Emily's death. When Michael questioned David about it, he merely shrugged it off as personal expenses and refused to elaborate further. "I don't need to justify every penny I spend, Michael," David had said, his voice clipped. "It has nothing to do with Emily." But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that it had everything to do with it. Why the secrecy? Why the sudden need for large sums of untraceable cash? It felt like another brick in the wall of David's carefully constructed facade. The pre-trial hearings began, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. News outlets had picked up the story, sensationalizing the love triangle gone wrong. Michael felt the eyes of the public, the media, and even his peers on him. He was Michael Vance, the acclaimed defense attorney, and he was expected to deliver. But how could he defend someone when he himself was haunted by the conviction that his client was a murderer? During one of the hearings, Detective Robert Johnson took the stand. He was a seasoned veteran, gruff but thorough, and he laid out the prosecution's case with grim efficiency. He described the crime scene, the victim's injuries, and the damning evidence that pointed to David Miller. When Michael began his cross-examination, he focused on the inconsistencies Sarah had noted. "Detective Johnson," Michael began, his voice calm, "you testified that the weapon was never recovered. Is that correct?" "That's correct, Mr. Vance. And yet you're confident that Mr. Miller is the perpetrator, despite the absence of the murder weapon? The totality of the evidence points to him, sir. His DNA, the witness testimony, the motive." "Regarding the DNA," Michael continued, "you mentioned a strand of hair found in the victim's hand. Was there any other DNA evidence found at the scene? Blood, skin cells, anything else that could definitively place Mr. Miller there?" Detective Johnson shifted uncomfortably. "Only trace amounts consistent with a struggle. The hair was the most significant." "And the blood spatter analysis," Michael pressed. "Did it conclusively indicate a single attacker, or could it suggest the involvement of more than one person, as my expert witness will testify?" Jessica Adams, the prosecutor, objected immediately. "Objection, speculation." The judge sustained the objection, but Michael had made his point. He knew he was merely chipping away, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of potential jurors. That night, as Michael walked out of the courthouse, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows, he noticed a black sedan parked down the street, its windows tinted. He couldn't see the driver, but he felt an unsettling gaze. It was probably nothing, just a reporter, he told himself. But the feeling of being watched, of being a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand, intensified. He drove home, the image of David Miller's unreadable face burned into his mind. He pulled into his driveway, the familiar comfort of his house suddenly feeling alien. As he unlocked his front door, he found a small, unmarked envelope tucked beneath the doormat. Inside, there was a single anonymous note typed on plain white paper. "Asterisk, don't dig too deep, Vance. Some truths are better left buried. You don't want to know what David Miller really is." Asterisk. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't a reporter. This was a warning, and it confirmed his deepest fear. David Miller was not just a murderer. He was a part of something far larger, far more dangerous. The trial was no longer just about justice. It was about survival. And Michael Vance had unwittingly stepped onto a chessboard where the pieces were not just pawns, but lives. His own included. The severed pigeon head, still vivid in Michael's mind, was a grotesque, undeniable punctuation mark to David Miller's chilling premonition. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. A message from an unseen enemy, confirming that David's conviction, and Michael's unwitting involvement, was indeed a pawn in a much larger, far more sinister game. The cold, sterile reality of his apartment felt suddenly fragile, the silence amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that going to the police was not an option. Not yet. Who would he even report? A cryptic message from a convicted murderer and a pigeon head? They'd think he was cracking under the pressure of a lost case. And if David was right, if the real players were as powerful as he implied, then the very institutions meant to protect him could be compromised. Michael spent the rest of that night in a haze of fear and frantic thought. He paced his living room, the city lights outside his window offering no comfort, only a stark reminder of the vast, indifferent world he now found himself navigating. Every shadow seemed to shift, every creak of the old building sounded like an approaching footstep. He replayed David's words, dissecting them, searching for any overlooked detail. The real players. Dead man's switch. Locked box. These weren't the ramblings of a desperate man. They were fragments of a terrifying truth. He had to assume David was telling the truth. The pigeon head made that assumption a matter of survival. His lawyer's mind, accustomed to sifting through evidence and building logical arguments, fought against the visceral terror. He needed facts, concrete information. The first step, the undeniable first step, was to understand the dead man's switch. What was it? Where was it? And why was it so important that people were willing to kill for it, to frame an innocent man and to threaten his own life? The next morning, Michael dragged himself to his office, the fluorescent lights seeming harsher than usual, the familiar hum of computers a grating intrusion. He tried to project an air of normalcy, greeting his secretary, Emily, with a strained smile, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the grim tableau from his doorstep. He locked his office door, pulling the blinds, creating a cocoon of privacy that felt more like a cage. He needed to revisit David Miller's entire case file, not just for legal arguments, but for hidden patterns, for any mention of the real players, for any clue that pointed to a locked box. He pulled up David's financial records, his personal history, his phone logs, everything he had painstakingly collected for the trial. He scanned for unusual transactions, strange contacts, anything that deviated from the picture of a hard-working, if troubled, family man. Nothing immediately jumped out, but Michael was looking with a new lens now. He remembered David mentioning a storage unit once, during a casual conversation about old family heirlooms, but had dismissed it as irrelevant. Now it echoed with significance. A storage unit. A locked box. It was a long shot, but it was a lead. As he delved deeper, a strange email popped up in his inbox. It was from an unknown sender. The subject line simply "Re Miller case." Michael's heart hammered. He almost deleted it, but something urged him to open it. The email was short, anonymous, and unsettling. Your client wasn't the only one with secrets. Some secrets are best left buried, Mr. Vance. For your own good. No sender name, no IP address discernible. Just a chilling warning that confirmed his fears. They knew he was digging. They were watching. The anonymous email solidified his resolve. He had to see David again. He needed more. He called the prison, pulling strings to arrange an urgent visit, citing new information crucial to David's appeal process. The request was granted, but not without a suspicious pause from the prison administration. Every step he took now felt scrutinized. The prison visiting room was a stark contrast to his office's false security. The stale air, the muted conversations, the heavy presence of guards. It all pressed down on him. David Miller, looking gaunt and defeated in his prison uniform, was brought in. His eyes, however, still held a spark of the old urgency Michael remembered. "Mr. Vance," David said, his voice raspy, "I knew you'd come back." Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The pigeon, David. It was real. And the email. They know I'm asking questions." David's face tightened. "I told you. They don't mess around." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the one-way mirror. "We don't have much time. I need to tell you everything before it's too late for both of us." The dead man's switch. "What is it? Where is it?" Michael pressed, his voice barely a whisper. David took a deep breath. "It's a collection of files, Mr. Vance. Documents, recordings, digital data. Proof. Proof of everything. A network of corruption, money laundering, extortion, even murder. They operate under the guise of legitimate businesses, but they control everything from the shadows. Politicians, judges, law enforcement. They have their hooks in everyone." "Who are they?" Michael asked, a cold dread creeping up his spine. "A man named Elias Thorne is at the top," David revealed, his voice laced with venom. "He's a ghost, hides behind shell corporations and puppets. Richard Hayes, the man you defended me for killing, he was one of Thorne's enforcers. A brutal one. He was trying to get to the switch. That night he cornered me. He threatened my family. He said if I didn't give him the location of the box, my wife, my daughter, they'd disappear. I panicked. I fought him. It was self-defense, Mr. Vance, I swear. But I knew no one would believe me, not with Thorne's power. David paused, his eyes pleading. The switch, it was my only leverage. My only way to protect my family, even if I went down for it. If anything happens to me, if I die in here, the switch is activated. The information goes public. It was my insurance policy. So where is it? Michael asked, his mind racing to process this avalanche of information. Thorne. Enforcers. A vast criminal enterprise. An old safe deposit box company, David said, his eyes darting to the door. Long defunct. Guardian Vaults. On Elm Street downtown. Most people think it's just an abandoned building now, but there's a hidden section. A subbasement. My box number is 327. I gave it to my sister Clara, but she doesn't know what it's for. I told her it was for an old family heirloom, a keepsake. She lives in upstate New York in Albany. Her name is Clara Miller. A sister. A diffused clue. Michael felt a jolt of hope mixed with profound fear. This was it. This was the key. And how do I get into this hidden section? There's a service entrance around the back, David whispered urgently. Old freight elevator. You need a specific code to activate it. It's my daughter's birthday. 0417. Followed by the last 4 digits of my old phone number you have in my file. She's named Lily, by the way. Lily Miller. Michael committed the information to memory, his mind already forming a plan. Clara Miller. Guardian Vaults. Elias Thorne. This wasn't just about David anymore. This was about exposing a dangerous network, about justice on a scale he had never imagined. They'll be watching me, David, Michael said, his voice tight. If I go after this, they'll know. They already are, Mr. Vance, David said with a grim nod. That email proves it. But you're the only one who can do this. You're outside, you're smart, and you have nothing to lose yet. My family is counting on you. The truth is counting on you. His words hung in the air as a guard approached, signaling the end of the visit. Michael nodded, a silent promise passing between them. He walked out of that prison with a new purpose, a terrifying mission thrust upon him. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was a reluctant warrior, armed only with fragmented clues and a growing sense of dread. Back at his office, Michael immediately started researching Elias Thorne. The name was familiar in certain circles, always associated with philanthropic endeavors and legitimate, if opaque, business ventures. But digging deeper, Michael found whispers, rumors of ruthless takeovers, of competitors mysteriously vanishing, of vast wealth accumulated through questionable means. Thorne was a phantom, a spider at the center of a web, as David had described. He also looked up Guardian Vaults. Indeed, it was an old financial institution that had gone bankrupt decades ago. Its building now a derelict shell in a forgotten part of downtown. But what if David was right about a hidden section? He then searched for Clara Miller in Albany. She existed. Her address and phone number were easily found. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a mosaic of danger and conspiracy. As the day ended, Michael felt a profound shift within himself. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered by a fierce determination. He had been handed a torch in the darkness, and he couldn't extinguish it. He had stepped onto that chessboard, and now, whether he liked it or not, he had to play. He knew the threats would escalate. He knew his life was on the line. But David Miller's desperate plea, and the chilling truth that had been unveiled, had ignited something in him. He would find that dead man's switch. He would expose Elias Thorne. He had to. For David. For Lily. And for himself. The game had truly begun. The cold, unforgiving air outside the prison walls did little to cool the fire now raging within Michael. David Miller's desperate plea, and the chilling truth that had been unveiled, had ignited something in him. He would find that dead man's switch. He would expose Elias Thorne. He had to. For David. For Lily. And for himself. The game had truly begun. Michael didn't go home. He couldn't. His apartment, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, too far removed from the battlefield he just entered. Instead, he drove straight to his downtown office, the city lights blurring into streaks of urgent purpose. The old building, usually quiet after hours, now hummed with an almost electric energy, echoing the frantic pace of his own thoughts. He needed to be alone with his files, with David Miller's life, and with the ghost of a man wronged. He switched on the harsh fluorescent lights, illuminating stacks of legal briefs and dusty tomes. The scent of old paper and stale coffee filled the air, a familiar comfort that now felt like the prelude to a storm. He pulled out the heavy box labeled Miller David Defense. This wasn't about defense anymore. It was about dismantling. It was about vengeance, not in the vindictive sense, but in the unwavering pursuit of justice for a man whose life had been stolen. Michael methodically began sifting through everything, not just the evidence presented at trial but the periphery. David Miller had been a meticulous man, almost to a fault. Every receipt, every email printout, every scribbled note in the margin of a document, it was all there. Before, Michael had looked for holes in the prosecution's case, for reasonable doubt. Now he was looking for patterns, for anomalies, for the whispers of a different story entirely. Hours bled into each other. The city outside went from the vibrant pulse of evening to the hushed stillness of late night. Michael ignored the gnawing hunger in his stomach, the ache in his shoulders. His eyes scanned page after page, his mind racing, connecting disparate pieces of information he'd previously dismissed as irrelevant. He found a series of financial transactions, seemingly legitimate, involving a small, obscure holding company called Aegis Solutions. These transactions appeared routinely in David's personal finances, always with a clear paper trail, always above board. But something felt off. The amounts were never large enough to draw attention, yet they were consistent like a pulse. He cross-referenced Aegis Solutions with the company David worked for, Thorn Industries. There was no direct link. Aegis Solutions seemed to be an independent entity, a ghost in the vast corporate machine. Yet, David had kept meticulous records of every single payment to or from this company, even for seemingly trivial expenses. Why? Why would a mid-level executive be so obsessed with the minutiae of an unrelated holding company's finances? Unless it wasn't unrelated at all. Michael leaned back, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and started sketching a flowchart. Thorn Industries at the top, David Miller a branch, and then Aegis Solutions a seemingly disconnected offshoot, but one David had clearly spent an inordinate amount of time tracking. Could this be it? Could this innocuous shell company be the key to Thorn's illicit empire? The perfect conduit for laundering money, for hiding assets, for facilitating the kind of shadowy deals David had hinted at? The more Michael dug, the more convinced he became. David hadn't just worked for Thorn Industries. He had been an unwilling accountant, a silent witness to Thorn's financial machinations, meticulously documenting every move of Aegis Solutions, perhaps as a form of personal insurance, a ledger of truth hidden in plain sight. This wasn't just about the murder of a rival. This was about the systemic corruption that allowed Thorn to operate with impunity. The dead man switch wasn't a single button. It was a complex web of financial data, a meticulously assembled dossier that, if brought to light, could unravel Thorn's entire criminal enterprise. But where was the switch itself? The trigger? David had documented the how, but not the where it was stored, or the when it was meant to be released. Michael remembered David's desperate eyes, the plea for Lily. Find Lily. She knows. Lily, David's younger sister. She was the missing piece. If David had left a trail, he would have ensured someone he trusted could follow it. Lily, perhaps, held the key to accessing the actual switch. He rummaged through David's personal effects file, finding an old emergency contact form. Lily Miller, her name pristine on the faded paper, along with an address in a quiet suburban neighborhood that seemed a world away from the gleaming towers of downtown. The address was several years old, but it was a starting point. He scribbled it down, a fresh burst of adrenaline coursing through him. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 3 a.m. The city was finally asleep, but Michael's mind was wide awake, buzzing with theories and possibilities. He packed the Aegis Solutions documents into a separate folder, a new priority. He couldn't trust them to be left in the office. He needed to secure them, analyze them further, maybe even consult a forensic accountant he knew, an old classmate named Sarah-chan, who had a knack for sniffing out financial irregularities that even the IRS missed. As he gathered his things, a faint notification chime echoed from his laptop. He'd left his email open. It was a new message from an unknown sender. The subject line was stark. A warning. Michael felt a prickle of unease. He clicked it open. The message was short, devoid of pleasantries. Some paths are best left untraveled, Michael. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing, especially when you start digging where you don't belong. Drop David Miller's ghost. Your career and your life depend on it. This is your only warning. There was no sender name, no IP address traceable, just a blank email address that looked like a string of random characters. It was untraceable, anonymous, and absolutely chilling. Michael stared at the screen, the words burning into his retinas. Thorn. It had to be Thorn. Or one of his enforcers. The speed with which this warning had arrived was terrifying. It meant Thorn had eyes everywhere, that he had known Michael's visit to the prison, known his renewed interest in David Miller's case. It meant he was already on Michael's trail. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of defiant anger. This wasn't just a warning. It was confirmation. Confirmation that he was on the right track, that Aegis Solutions was indeed a nerve center for Thorn's illicit operations, and that the dead man switch was real and potentially devastating. They were watching him. They wanted him to stop. But Michael had just found his first real lead, a tangible thread in Thorn's elaborate tapestry of deceit. He had a name, Aegis Solutions. He had a target, Lily Miller. And he had a clear, undeniable threat. He closed his laptop, the screen going dark, but the words of the warning still echoed in his mind. He wasn't just defending a guilty man anymore. He was exposing a criminal empire, and in doing so, he had painted a target on his own back. The game had begun, and Michael was no longer a passive player. He was in it fully and irrevocably. He had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than Thorn could ever anticipate. The next step was Lily. He would find her, and together they would finish what David Miller had started. The air in Michael's office felt thick, heavy with the weight of revelation and resolve. He was no longer a passive player. He was in it fully and irrevocably. He had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than Thorn could ever anticipate. The next step was Lily. He would find her, and together they would finish what David Miller had started. Finding Lily was a different challenge entirely. She wasn't just missing. She was in hiding. Hiding from Thorn, from the very forces that had silenced David. Michael knew conventional methods wouldn't work. He couldn't just call her old number or check public records. He needed to think like David. Where would David Miller, a man who meticulously planned everything, have told Lily to go if the worst happened? He started with David's personal effects, the few boxes the police had released after the initial investigation. He'd gone through them countless times, searching for legal loopholes, for hidden clues about the bribery. Now he was looking for something else. A personal detail, a forgotten habit, anything that spoke of David's life outside the courtroom. He sifted through old photo albums, a worn leather-bound journal filled with philosophical musings, and a collection of obscure poetry books. Nothing jumped out. Then, he remembered a conversation with David months before the trial. David had spoken of a small independent bookstore, tucked away in a quiet tree-lined street in a forgotten part of town. He'd called it his sanctuary, a place where the world made sense, where he could lose himself in stories. He'd mentioned Lily loved it too, that he often bought her gifts from there. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead Michael had that felt genuinely personal to David, untainted by his legal life. The bookstore was exactly as David had described. Charmingly cluttered, smelling of old paper and fresh coffee. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a cascade of silver hair behind the counter looked up as Michael entered. He introduced himself, explaining he was a friend of David Miller's. A flicker of sadness crossed her face. "David was a good man," she said softly, her voice raspy. "He came here often, and Lily too for a while." Michael's heart quickened. "Lily? You remember her?" "Of course. Sweet girl. Always with a book in her hand. David used to buy her the most peculiar things. Obscure poetry, first editions of forgotten novels. He had a real knack for finding just the right one." She paused, her gaze drifting to a dusty shelf. "There was one series, though. He bought her every single volume as it came out. The Whispering Shadows, a fantasy series. Very rare. He said they shared a private joke about it." "The Whispering Shadows," Michael repeated, committing the title to memory. "Has she been in recently?" The woman shook her head. Not since David passed. I worried about her, you know. She seemed so fragile." Michael thanked her, his mind racing. "A private joke. A rare series. It felt like a breadcrumb David had left. He browsed the shelves, eventually locating the Whispering Shadows series. He bought the latest volume, the one David would have bought for Lily. He paid, his fingers tracing the embossed title. Back in his car, the book felt heavier than it should. He flipped through the pages, half expecting a note to fall out. Nothing. He ran his fingers along the spine, then the cover. He tried to think like David, like Lily. A private joke. He remembered David's penchant for codes, for hidden meanings. He recalled David's love for old-fashioned ciphers, how he'd sometimes doodle them on his legal pads during long meetings. He remembered a very specific type of cipher David had shown him once, almost as a parlor trick. A book cipher, where specific words on specific pages formed a message. But which words? Which pages? He pulled out his phone, searching for Whispering Shadows book cipher David Miller. No results. Of course not. It was a personal thing. He then searched for common book ciphers, scrolling through different methods. He spent an hour growing increasingly frustrated. Then something clicked. The bookstore owner had mentioned David bought every volume as it came out. What if the cipher wasn't in the book, but between the books? What if the series itself held the key? He remembered the titles of the books in the series. They often had cryptic subtitles. He found a list of the series titles online. He wrote them down. He looked at the book in his hand. The Whispering Shadows, Echoes of the Lost. He remembered David's journal entries, his philosophical musings. David often linked seemingly disparate ideas. He thought about the safe deposit box, the one David had given him the key to. He'd found the USB drive there. What else had been there? A small leather-bound notebook. He'd dismissed it as personal writings, but now, he drove straight back to his office, retrieved the notebook from his safe. He opened it, flipping through David's neat, precise handwriting. It was mostly observations, philosophical thoughts, and quotes. But on one page near the back was a sequence of seemingly random numbers. March 17, 22, May 1, 14, 12-9-12-25, followed by a single word. Whispers. Michael's breath hitched. Whispers. The series title. He looked at the numbers. Could they be page numbers, line numbers, word numbers? He grabbed the book he just bought. He tried the first set of numbers. Page 17, line 3, word 22. He counted carefully. The word was sanctuary. The second set. Page 5, line 1, word 14. The word was beneath. The third set. Page 12, line 9, word 12. The word was... And word 25. Elder. Sanctuary beneath the elder. It sounded like a place. He quickly searched online for Sanctuary Beneath the Elder and found a small, almost forgotten community garden centered around an ancient oak tree in a secluded part of the city. It was precisely the kind of quiet, out-of-the-way place David would have chosen. He drove there immediately, the fading afternoon light casting long shadows. The garden was serene, overgrown in places, yet clearly tended. He walked past rows of wilting flowers and vegetable patches until he saw it. A massive, gnarled oak tree, its branches spreading wide like protective arms. Beneath it was a worn wooden bench. And on that bench, a figure sat hunched, staring into the distance. A woman. Her shoulders were slender, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Lily. Michael approached slowly, cautiously. Lily, he called out softly, not wanting to startle her. She flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, fixed on him. Recognition flickered, quickly followed by a mask of fear. She started to stand, her body tense, ready to bolt. Wait, Michael said, holding up his hands. It's Michael. Michael Thorne. David Miller's lawyer. He immediately corrected himself. I mean David Miller's friend. I was his lawyer. Her gaze searched his face, wary. How did you find me? Her voice was a fragile whisper, laced with suspicion. David left a message, he explained, holding up the book. In this, a cipher. He wanted me to find you. She sank back onto the bench, her shoulders slumping. A cipher, she repeated, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, quickly vanishing. That sounds like David. She looked at him again, a flicker of something new in her eyes. A desperate hope, perhaps. Why? Because he knew, Michael said, sitting down at the other end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. He knew something was going to happen to him. He knew I'd be looking for answers. And he knew you had pieces of the puzzle I couldn't find on my own. Lily was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the distant skyline. He told me to disappear, she finally said, her voice barely audible. To hide. To trust no one. Especially not anyone involved with Thorn. I understand why you'd be wary, Michael said gently. But I'm not with Thorn. I'm trying to expose him. To finish what David started. He recounted briefly what he had found, the hidden bank accounts, the shell corporations, the pattern of extortion and manipulation. He spoke of the USB drive, the undeniable evidence David had gathered. As he spoke, he watched her face. The fear was still there, but a different emotion was slowly emerging. A deep, simmering anger. When he finished, she finally turned to him fully. It's worse than you think, Michael, she said, her voice gaining a surprising strength. David wasn't just exposing Thorn's corruption. He was trying to bring down an entire operation. Thorn isn't just a crooked lawyer. He's the architect of a vast criminal enterprise, built on stolen assets, coerced testimonies, and the systematic destruction of anyone who gets in his way. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with a desperate intensity. And David had something Thorn wanted more than anything. Something Thorn had stolen years ago. Something immensely valuable. And David found a way to take it back. That's why Thorn killed him. Not just to silence him, but to retrieve what David had taken. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about a guilty verdict anymore. This was about something far, far bigger. What was it? He asked, his voice low. What did David take from Thorn? Lily hesitated, glancing around the empty garden as if Thorn's eyes might be watching from the shadows. It wasn't a physical thing, not exactly, she whispered. It was a network of names, of shell companies, of hidden accounts. The true blueprint of Thorn's empire. David called it the ledger. He'd spent years piecing it together, and he finally had it. He was going to leak it, not just to the authorities but to the world. He was going to dismantle Thorn's entire operation, brick by painstaking brick. And you have it? Michael asked, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. She shook her head. No, David was too smart for that. He knew if he had it on him, Thorn would find it. He entrusted it to me, but not directly. He set up a dead man switch. A series of steps, a puzzle. If he didn't check in with me by a certain date, the final piece would be released. He wanted me to be safe, to complete his work if he couldn't. So you know how to access it? I know the first step, she admitted. But it's dangerous. Thorn knows I was close to David. He knows I might have the key. He's been looking for me. I've been moving from place to place, barely sleeping, always looking over my shoulder. She looked at him, her vulnerability raw. I don't know if I can do this alone, Michael. I'm terrified. Michael reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. You're not alone anymore, Lily. We're in this together. David brought us together for a reason. He trusted us both. He paused, his gaze hardening. Thorn thinks he won. He thinks he's erased David and secured his secrets. He's wrong. We have the evidence, Lily. We have the means to expose him. We just need to activate David's final plan. He could see the flicker of hope, battling with ingrained fear in her eyes. What's the first step? He asked. Lily took a deep breath, her gaze distant, as if recalling something from a nightmare. The first step involves a secure server, hidden deep within a data center in Nevada. David called it the vault. We need to access it, and for that we need a specific decryption key. A key that is not physical. Not physical? It's a sequence, Lily explained, her voice barely above a whisper. A sequence of numbers and letters, derived from something David loved. Something he believed held the truth of everything. She looked at Michael, her eyes pleading. But there's a catch. We only have one shot at this. If we fail, if we enter the wrong key, the vault self-destructs, and everything David worked for, everything he died for, is lost forever. The weight of her words settled heavily between them. One shot. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything Michael could have imagined. This wasn't just about a lawyer defending a guilty man. It was about bringing down an empire, and they held the only key. Where do we start? Michael asked, his voice steady, masking the tremor of apprehension that ran through him. Lily looked up at the darkening sky, a shiver running through her. First we disappear. Thorn will be looking for me, and now he'll be looking for you too. We have to move fast, Michael. Because the deadline David set. It's coming. In less than 48 hours. Michael stared, the words echoing in the sudden chill of the evening air. 48 hours. Disappear. Thorn. It was like a switch had flipped, plunging his carefully constructed world into a chaotic, dangerous reality he'd only ever read about in legal thrillers. Thorn. Michael's voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the pounding in his chest. What are you talking about, Jessica? Thorn is a legitimate businessman. A client of David's, yes, but... Jessica cut him off, her eyes, usually so warm and kind, now sharp with a desperate urgency. Legitimate? Michael, you haven't seen the real Thorn. He's a predator. He controls everything from the shadows, and David was trying to expose him. That's why he's in prison. That's why I'm here. And now that's why you're in danger. The implication hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. David hadn't just been framed, he'd been silenced. And Michael, in his unwitting defense, had become a pawn, now an accomplice, in a game with stakes far beyond a simple murder trial. What did David do? Michael demanded, grabbing her arm, the urgency in her voice finally overriding his disbelief. What was he trying to expose? Jessica pulled her arm free, scanning the street with a frantic intensity that made Michael instinctively look over his shoulder. Not here. Not now. Every second we stand here, we're a target. Thorn has eyes and ears everywhere. He's a ghost in the system, but he leaves a trail of ruined lives. She started walking a brisk, determined pace, pulling Michael along. First, we get rid of our phones. Both of them. They're tracking devices. Then we need cash. Lots of it. And then we drive. Far. Somewhere no one knows us. Michael fumbled for his phone, his mind racing. This was insane. He was a lawyer, an officer of the court. He couldn't just disappear. But then he remembered David locked away, facing a life sentence for a crime he apparently didn't commit. All while Michael had been busy trying to win a case that was rigged from the start. He remembered the chilling phone call from David, the veiled threats. Suddenly, the idea of disappearing didn't seem so insane. Seemed like survival. They ducked into a small, nondescript grocery store, Michael feeling a paranoid itch between his shoulder blades, convinced every casual glance was a spy. Jessica led him to the prepaid phone section, her movements efficient and practiced. They bought 2 burner phones with cash, then found a secluded alleyway behind the store. With a grim determination, Jessica took Michael's pristine, expensive smartphone and smashed it against the brick wall, the screen spiderwebbing into oblivion. She did the same to her own. No more digital footprint, she stated, her voice tight. No more breadcrumbs for Thorn to follow. We use these only when absolutely necessary, and never in the same place twice. Next, they went to an ATM, Michael withdrawing every last dollar from his personal account. Jessica did the same, pulling out a surprisingly large sum. David always kept emergency funds, she explained, catching Michael's questioning look. He knew a day like this might come. As they drove out of the city in Michael's car, Jessica navigated them through a labyrinth of back roads, avoiding highways, moving like shadows in the encroaching twilight. The silence in the car was thick with unspoken questions and mounting dread. Finally, when they were miles from the city, the urban sprawl replaced by dark, winding country roads flanked by dense forest, Michael broke the silence. Okay, Jessica. We're off the grid. Now tell me everything. Start with the deadline. What did David mean? Less than 48 hours. Jessica took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the disappearing road ahead, illuminated only by the headlights. David, he didn't just stumble onto Thorn's operation. He was investigating him for years. Thorn isn't just a wealthy businessman, Michael. He's the head of a vast criminal enterprise. He launders money, he deals in illicit goods, he manipulates markets, he owns politicians, judges, even some law enforcement. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. This was a nightmare. And David was going to expose him? Yes. David had compiled an entire dossier, a digital ledger, evidence of Thorn's entire network, his illicit dealings, his shell corporations, the names of everyone involved. He called it the Black Book. Jessica's voice was low, laced with a mix of pride and fear. He was working with an investigative journalist, a man named Robert Jenkins, to go public. They were going to blow the lid off everything. Robert Jenkins, Michael repeated, a name stirring in the back of his mind. He'd seen it in headlines. A journalist who had suddenly disappeared a few months ago, presumed dead after a boating accident. He was the one who vanished, wasn't he? Jessica nodded grimly. It wasn't an accident. Thorne silenced him. David knew he was next. He tried to hide the black book, to secure it so Thorne couldn't get his hands on it. But he made a mistake. He trusted the wrong person, someone close to him, someone who betrayed him to Thorne. That's how Thorne found out about the black book and about David's plan. And the murder? Michael asked, his mind reeling, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. The woman David was accused of killing, Evelyn Shaw. How does she fit into this? Evelyn, she was a low-level operative for Thorne. A courier mostly. But she had a conscience. She was getting cold feet. David had been trying to turn her, to convince her to provide a corroborating testimony for the black book. She was the one who was supposed to meet Robert Jenkins with a crucial piece of physical evidence, something that would link Thorne directly to a major money laundering scheme. But Thorne found out. He intercepted her before she could meet Jenkins. He killed her, Michael. He framed David for it, using his own methods against him, making it look like a crime of passion to discredit David and the black book before it ever saw the light of day. And then he made sure David was arrested, charged, and locked away with no chance of escape. Michael felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. And the black book? Where is it? That's where the deadline comes in, Jessica said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. When David realized he was trapped, that Thorne had won, he put a failsafe in place. He knew Thorne would try to get the black book. So David set up a dead man switch. If Thorne doesn't release David, or if David isn't free by a certain time, the black book, everything in it, will be automatically released to the public. It's encrypted, of course, but the key is tied to a specific date and time. Less than 48 hours from now. Michael's jaw dropped. He's blackmailing Thorne? Precisely. It's the only leverage David has. Thorne wants that black book destroyed more than anything. It would expose his entire empire, bring down powerful people, ruin him. So he has a choice. Release David, clear his name, and hope he can still get his hands on the black book before it's too late. Or let everything unravel. But if David reveals the black book, he's essentially signing his own death warrant. Even if he does get out, Michael argued, trying to find a flaw in the terrifying logic. Thorne would never let him live. David knows that, Jessica said, her voice filled with a heartbreaking resignation. He told me that if it comes to that, at least his sacrifice won't be in vain. The truth will come out. But he doesn't want it to come to that. He wants to be free, to clear his name, to live. That's why I need your help, Michael. You're his lawyer. You're the only one who can navigate this from the inside, who can force Thorne's hand without triggering the failsafe prematurely. But how? Michael's mind was a whirlwind of legal strategies, all of them inadequate against an unseen, all-powerful criminal mastermind. What can I do? Thorne controls everything, you said. The police, the courts. We have to make Thorne believe we can get the black book for him, that we can stop the failsafe, Jessica said, a desperate glint in her eyes. Even if we can't, we have to buy David time. And then we have to find a way to expose Thorne's involvement in Evelyn Shaw's murder and David's framing, before the deadline. If we can present irrefutable evidence to a credible, uncorrupted authority that Thorne is behind it all, perhaps we can force his hand, get David released, and then ensure the black book is used to bring Thorne down properly, not just as a desperate last resort. Uncorrupted authority? Michael scoffed, the irony bitter. Where do we find that, Jessica? You just said Thorne owns everyone. Not everyone, Jessica corrected, a flicker of hope in her voice. There are still good people, Michael. People who haven't been bought. We just have to find them. And we have to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than Thorne. We have less than 48 hours. Thorne will be looking for us, trying to stop the black book from being released. He'll be trying to find me to get the key, or at least to disable the failsafe. He'll be trying to find you because you were David's lawyer, and he'll assume David told you something, or that you know where the black book is. We are his biggest threats right now. The weight of her words settled on Michael, heavy and cold. He was no longer just a lawyer defending a client. He was a fugitive, entangled in a dangerous conspiracy that could cost him his life. He looked at Jessica, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard, her eyes burning with a fierce resolve. He had to help David. Not just as a client but as a man who had been wronged, and now as a man whose life was on the line. "Okay," Michael said, his voice firming, the initial shock giving way to a nascent determination. "What's the first step? Where do we even begin to look for this uncorrupted authority? And how do we convince Thorne we can help him when we don't even know where the black book is ourselves?" Jessica leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Thorne has a weakness, Michael. Everyone does. He's meticulous, but he's also arrogant. He leaves subtle trails, assuming no one will ever be smart enough or brave enough to follow them. And as for convincing him, we have to create a diversion. Powerful one. Something that will shake his confidence and make him believe we have the upper hand, even when we don't. We need to hit him where it hurts. And I think I know just the place to start." She opened her eyes, meeting Michael's gaze. "We're not going to hide forever. We're going to hit back. And we're going to start by going after the one thing Thorne values more than his own life. His reputation. Specifically, his public image as a philanthropic, legitimate businessman. We're going to expose a small piece of his operation, just enough to rattle him, make him desperate, and force him to come to us. And I know a former colleague of David's, a private investigator, who might be able to help us dig up just the right dirt." The car sped through the night, the surrounding darkness swallowing them whole. But inside, a new fire had been ignited. Michael, the unsuspecting lawyer, was now a player in a deadly game. With less than 2 days to save his client, expose a criminal empire, and somehow stay alive. The chill of the night air did little to cool the inferno of fear and righteous anger now burning within Michael. 2 days. David's fate, and perhaps his own, hung precariously on the threads of a desperate investigation he hadn't even begun. He knew he couldn't go to Detective Miller with just the cryptic words of an anonymous informant. He needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof that a powerful syndicate was framing David. He drove in a daze, the city lights a blur. His office, usually a sanctuary of legal logic, now felt exposed, a potential target. But it was also his battlefield. Pulling into the deserted parking garage, the silence pressed in, amplifying the frantic beat of his heart. He grabbed his briefcase, the weight of it suddenly feeling like a burden of responsibility he hadn't asked for. Inside his office, the sterile fluorescent lights hummed, casting long, unsettling shadows. He pulled out the crumpled note from the informant, its hastily scrawled words now etched into his memory. Orion Holdings. Falcone. Warehouse 7. These were his only leads, a flimsy thread leading into a labyrinth. His first thought was Jessica, his loyal, sharp-witted paralegal. She had a knack for digging, for finding needles in digital haystacks. But how much could he tell her? He couldn't risk her safety, not yet. He decided to compartmentalize, to give her tasks that seemed routine but were, in fact, crucial pieces of a much larger, darker puzzle. The next morning, the office hummed with a false sense of normalcy. Jessica arrived, coffee in hand, oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred in her boss's world overnight. "Morning, Michael," she chirped, her usual bright demeanor a stark contrast to his internal turmoil. "Any breakthroughs on David's case? That appeal deadline is looming." He forced a smile. "Actually, Jessica, I need you to do some deep diving for me. I've got a hunch about a shell corporation. I want you to look into a company called Orion Holdings. Registered address, board members, any subsidiaries, recent large transactions. Anything that seems out of place for a seemingly legitimate investment firm." Jessica narrowed her eyes, a flicker of curiosity in them. "Orion Holdings? Never heard of them. What's the angle?" "Just a long shot," he lied smoothly. "A lead from an old contact. Could be nothing, could be everything. I need to make sure we've explored every avenue for David. And discreetly, Jessica. I don't want to tip anyone off about our inquiries." She nodded, professional and efficient. "Understood. I'll start digging right away. You want me to cross-reference their financial records with any local construction or real estate projects?" "Excellent idea," Michael said, trying to keep his voice even. "Focus on anything that looks like rapid expansion or unusual capital flow." While Jessica immersed herself in the digital world, Michael turned his attention to Warehouse 7. He couldn't search for it directly without raising flags. He needed a physical location. He remembered the informant mentioning the docks, the old industrial district. He pulled up satellite maps, zooming in on the sprawling, derelict area near the city's forgotten waterfront. There were dozens of warehouses, all numbered. Finding Warehouse 7, without drawing suspicion would be a challenge. He decided to wait until nightfall. The day dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Michael pretended to work on other cases, but his mind was a whirlwind of possibilities and dangers. He kept checking his phone, half expecting a call, a text, a warning. Nothing. The silence was almost more unnerving than an overt threat. Late in the afternoon, Jessica's voice cut through his anxious thoughts. "Michael, you might want to see this." He walked over to her desk, his heart pounding. On her screen was a complex web of corporate filings. "Orion Holdings is interesting," she began, a note of genuine surprise in her voice. "Their registered address is a P.O. box in a strip mall. The board members are all listed with generic names and addresses that tie back to other P.O. boxes or abandoned properties. It's a classic shell game. But here's the kicker. I found a series of transactions, massive ones, flowing through Orion Holdings, often in amounts just under the federal reporting threshold, but aggregating to hundreds of millions. And they're all linked to a series of seemingly legitimate import-export businesses, mostly dealing in construction materials and specialized machinery." "Construction materials and machinery?" Michael repeated, a chill running down his spine. This was exactly the kind of front a drug operation would use for money laundering, especially if they were moving large, heavy shipments. "Yes. And get this," Jessica continued, her finger hovering over a specific transaction. "One of their largest clients, or rather, a frequent recipient of these large, untraceable payments, is a company called Falcone Logistics. Their primary operations are listed as freight forwarding and industrial storage. And guess what their main storage facility is?" Michael felt a jolt of recognition, a cold dread washing over him. "Warehouse 7, he whispered. Jessica's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "It's listed right here. Falcone Logistics, Warehouse 7, Old Industrial District, near the docks." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, horrifyingly swiftly. The informant hadn't lied. Orion Holdings, Falcone, Warehouse 7. It was all connected. This wasn't just about David. It was about a vast criminal enterprise operating right under their noses. "Jessica," Michael said, his voice low and urgent, "this information is highly sensitive. You cannot, under any circumstances, mention this to anyone. Not a word. Not even a hint. Do you understand?" Her usually confident demeanor faltered, replaced by a look of concern. "Michael, what's going on? You're scaring me." He looked into her eyes, seeing the genuine fear. He knew he had to tell her something, or risk her inadvertently exposing them both. "Jessica, what you've uncovered, it's not just a corporate irregularity. It's evidence of a major criminal operation. David is caught in the middle of it. And if they know we're looking, we could be in serious danger." Her face went pale. "Danger? Like, real danger?" "Yes, real danger. This isn't a game, Jessica. I need you to trust me completely. For now, you need to delete those search histories, clear your cache, everything. Make it look like you were just doing general research. And then I need you to go home. Tell no one what you found. If I need you, I'll call. But for tonight, you are out of this." She hesitated, but then, seeing the seriousness in his eyes, she nodded. "Okay, Michael. Be careful." She quickly scrubbed her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "I'll see you tomorrow." As she left, Michael felt a pang of guilt for involving her, but also a surge of determination. He was on the right track. Now he had to go to Warehouse 7, alone. He waited until the city was truly asleep, the streets largely empty, before he ventured out again. He drove his nondescript sedan, sticking to back roads, his phone's GPS guiding him towards the old industrial district. The area was a desolate landscape of crumbling brick buildings, rusted metal and overgrown weeds. Streetlights were sparse, casting pools of sickly yellow light that only intensified the shadows. He found Warehouse 7 easily enough. It was a massive, squat building, its corrugated metal walls streaked with grime, its windows boarded up or shattered. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded the perimeter, but sections were bent, rusted, or simply missing, suggesting neglected security. A single flickering halogen light illuminated the main entrance, casting an eerie glow. He parked several blocks away, turning off his headlights and engine. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant lapping of water from the docks and the occasional creak of metal in the wind. He grabbed a small flashlight and a multi-tool from his glove compartment. This was madness, he knew. He was a lawyer, not a spy. But David's life and the truth depended on him. He approached the fence cautiously, his senses hyper-alert. No guards, no cameras that he could immediately spot. He slipped through a gap in the fence, the rusted metal scraping against his jacket. He moved like a phantom, hugging the shadows, his heart thumping against his ribs. He reached the back of the warehouse where the darkness was deepest. He tried a side door locked solid. He circled the building, looking for any weakness. His eyes finally landed on a small, grimy window high up, partially obscured by overgrown ivy. It looked like it might lead to an office or a storage loft. Using a discarded wooden pallet, he managed to scramble up, testing the window. It was old, its frame rotted. With a gentle push and a groan of aged wood, it gave way, swinging inward with a soft creak. He paused, listening. Silence. He hoisted himself through the opening, landing softly on a dusty concrete floor. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, something metallic and faintly chemical. He clicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. He was in a small, dilapidated office, filled with overturned desks and scattered papers. He moved quickly, quietly, through a connecting door into the main warehouse floor. The space was enormous, cavernous, the ceiling lost in shadow. Rows upon rows of towering shelves stretched into the gloom, laden with crates and pallets. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. His flashlight beam danced across the labels on the crates. Industrial components, machinery parts, construction supplies. It all looked legitimate on the surface. But he remembered Jessica's findings. These were the fronts. He moved deeper, his footsteps echoing eerily. He was looking for anything out of place, anything that screamed drug operation or money laundering. He knew he was risking everything, but the thought of David rotting in prison fueled his courage. Then he saw it. Tucked away behind a stack of lumber partially obscured, was a section of the floor that looked different, newer. A faint, almost imperceptible seam ran across the concrete. It looked like a hidden compartment, or perhaps a reinforced vault. He knelt, running his fingers along the seam. It was expertly done, almost invisible. He tried to pry it open with his multi-tool, but it was too tight, too heavy. He needed leverage, something more substantial. As he was examining the seam, a faint rhythmic thumping started from somewhere deep within the warehouse. A low mechanical hum that grew steadily louder. His blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. He extinguished his flashlight, pressing himself against a cold metal shelf, barely breathing. The thumping grew heavier, closer. It sounded like heavy machinery or maybe a forklift. Panic seized him. He had been found. A beam of light, much stronger than his small flashlight, cut through the darkness, sweeping across the aisles. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, then peeked through a gap in the crates. A figure, silhouetted against the powerful beam of a forklift, was moving slowly down an adjacent aisle. The forklift was laden with several large, unmarked crates. He watched, frozen in fear, as the figure maneuvered the forklift. It was a burly man wearing a dark cap pulled low. The man stopped the forklift near the reinforced section of the floor Michael had just discovered. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. He was about to witness something significant. The man dismounted the forklift, pulling out a remote control. With a soft whirring sound, a section of the concrete floor began to slowly, silently rise. Beneath it, bathed in the forklift's powerful beam, was a large subterranean chamber. And inside, stacked neatly, were not construction materials, but bundles of cash, wrapped in plastic, and dozens of heavy brick-like packages, clearly marked with symbols Michael didn't recognize, but whose contents he could now guess with terrifying certainty. Drugs. A massive stash. And beside them, an array of sophisticated electronic equipment, monitors flickering with complex data. A command center. He felt a wave of nausea. This was far bigger than he could have imagined. This wasn't just money laundering. It was a full-blown drug trafficking and distribution hub, hidden in plain sight. The burly man began to unload the crates from the forklift, lowering them into the hidden chamber. Michael knew he had to get out. He had seen too much. He had the proof, but now he was in mortal danger. As the man disappeared into the chamber, Michael seized his chance. He moved silently, retracing his steps, his mind racing. He needed to get to a phone to somehow document this, to get it to the authorities without getting himself killed. He reached the window he had entered through, scrambling back out into the cold night air. He landed awkwardly, scraping his hand, but he barely noticed the pain. He ran, not looking back, until he reached his car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, his breath ragged. He started the engine, threw the car into reverse, and sped away, leaving the sinister warehouse behind. He had found his proof, but the question now wasn't just how to save David, but how to escape the deadly web he had just stumbled into. A web that was already tightening around him. He had less than 48 hours, and he was certain, absolutely certain, that they knew he had been there. The game had just become lethal. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. The cheap rental car a blur on the highway. Every shadow felt like a lurking predator. Every distant headlight a pair of eyes tracking him. The images from that house flashed behind his eyes. The bloodstains, the meticulously organized chaos, the chilling symbols, and the ledger. Project Chimera. The name echoed in his mind like a death knell. He'd seen enough to know David was innocent, a pawn in a game far larger and deadlier than he could have ever imagined. But he'd also seen enough to know they knew he'd been there. That cold, calculated certainty in his gut was the most terrifying feeling he'd ever experienced. He was a lawyer, not a spy, not a vigilante. His weapon was the law, his shield due process. But the law, he now understood, was a fragile thing, easily bent, easily broken. Especially when confronting an enemy that operated entirely outside its bounds. There was no police station he could walk into, no FBI agent he could trust without putting a target on their back, and an even bigger one on his own. This wasn't a case of a corrupt cop or a rogue prosecutor. This was something far more entrenched, far more insidious. He drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, trying to shake off the invisible tail he was convinced was there. He ditched the rental car in a crowded mall parking lot, took a taxi, then another, then walked several blocks, constantly scanning his surroundings, before finally making his way back to his own apartment building. The familiar brick facade offered no comfort, felt like a trap. His heart hammered against his ribs as he fumbled with his keys, every nerve ending screaming. He pushed open the door to his apartment, the mundane click of the lock echoing too loudly in the sudden silence. He stepped inside slowly, cautiously, his eyes sweeping across the living room. Nothing seemed out of place. The stack of legal briefs on the coffee table, the remote control on the armrest, the faint scent of the coffee he'd made that morning. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Too exactly. He walked into the kitchen, his gaze snagging on the small magnet on his refrigerator, a souvenir from a trip he'd taken years ago. It was tilted ever so slightly. He was meticulous, almost obsessively so, about the placement of things. He knew with a sickening certainty that he had left it perfectly straight. A chill snaked down his spine. They hadn't touched anything obvious. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Asterisk, we were here. We know. Asterisk. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, his thumb hovering over the screen. An unknown number. He stared at it, the caller ID a stark white against the dark screen. His mind raced. This wasn't a random telemarketer. This was them. A test. A confirmation. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Answering would acknowledge their presence, their power. He powered off the phone, pulling out the SIM card and snapping it in half, then removed the battery. He stared at the now useless device, a relic from a life that no longer existed. He was off the grid, or at least he was trying to be. He paced his apartment, the blood roaring in his ears. He had less than 48 hours. David's execution was set. He had to act. But how? He needed proof, undeniable proof that could break through the wall of corruption and power. He needed to expose Project Chimera. He pulled out a notepad and a pen, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented images and half-formed theories. He drew a crude map of the house, marking the locations of the ledger, the symbols, the hidden room. He tried to recall every detail, every word he'd seen. The ledger entries were not just financial. They were coded names, dates, locations. He remembered seeing Titan, Hydra, and Cerberus alongside the financial figures. Code words, he realized. For what? Operations? Personnel? He needed to analyze the ledger, But he hadn't brought it with him. Fool! He cursed himself. He had been too focused on escape, on survival. But he had memorized key details, a page number, a series of seemingly random numbers and letters. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back. But not to the house. The house was compromised. He needed help. Not police, not the FBI. Someone who understood the digital underworld. Someone who could operate in the shadows. Someone he could trust with his life. His mind immediately went to Alex Chan. Alex, his old college roommate, a brilliant but eccentric computer science whiz who had dropped out of the corporate world years ago to become a freelance cybersecurity consultant, specializing in untraceable data recovery and digital forensics for clients who demanded absolute discretion. Alex was a ghost online, living off the grid, taking only the most challenging, ethically ambiguous cases. He was the only person Michael knew who could possibly unravel the digital threads of an organization like this. But contacting Alex was a risk. Alex was careful, almost paranoid. He wouldn't just pick up a random call. Michael needed a secure channel, a prearranged dead drop, something. He remembered an old, obscure online forum they used to frequent in college, a place for debating complex coding algorithms, long since abandoned by everyone but a handful of nostalgic nerds. It was the digital equivalent of a secret handshake. He dug out an old, dusty laptop from the back of his closet, one he hadn't connected to the internet in years. He booted it up, bypassing his secure home network and connecting to a public Wi-Fi signal from a coffee shop 3 blocks away using a portable hotspot he kept for emergencies. He typed in the old forum address, his fingers trembling slightly. The site loaded, a relic of early 2000s web design. He navigated to their old private message thread, a string of inside jokes and coding challenges. He typed a single cryptic message: Project Chimera. Chess game. Need your knight. He knew Alex would understand. Project Chimera was the name of a particularly complex, unsolvable coding puzzle they'd obsessed over in their senior year. Chess game was their code for a high-stakes, dangerous situation. Need your knight meant he needed Alex's unique skills. He closed the laptop, feeling a sliver of hope cut through the suffocating dread. Now he had to prepare. He grabbed a small backpack, stuffing it with essentials, a change of clothes, some cash, a few energy bars. He was no longer just a lawyer, he was a fugitive. He pulled out the legal pad again, focusing on the names and symbols he'd seen. Titan, Hydra, Cerberus. These weren't mere code names. They were mythological beasts, symbols of power, resilience, multi-headed threats. This wasn't just a criminal organization. It had an ideology, a structure that mirrored the very myths of unassailable power. He remembered the specific symbol, a stylized serpent devouring its own tail, but with 3 distinct heads. Ouroboros, the ancient symbol of cyclicality, but with a twist. This was a hydra, regenerating and multiplying. His mind flashed back to David. David, the quiet, unassuming man, caught in this monstrous web. David didn't just know something. He was somehow central to Project Chimera. Not as a participant, but as a victim, a sacrifice. The organization needed David out of the way permanently, and the execution was the perfect, legally sanctioned method. He needed to understand the why. Why David? Why this elaborate frame-up? It wasn't just about silencing him. It was about sending a message, about consolidating power, about a larger operation that David inadvertently threatened. Suddenly his phone, the one he had disabled, rang. It was lying on his kitchen counter, battery removed, SIM card snapped. Yet it was ringing. A low, distorted hum, like static, emanating from the speaker. His blood ran cold. He stared at it, frozen. The faint, rhythmic pulsing of the sound was like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, mockingly alive. He slowly reached for it, his hand trembling. As his fingers brushed the cold plastic, a voice, deep and synthesized, barely a whisper, seeped from the inert device. "Tick-tock, Michael. The clock is running. 47 hours, 32 minutes. Then silence. The phone was dead again, just a slab of plastic and metal. But the message had been delivered, clear as a bell, directly into his soul. They weren't just watching. They were inside his head, inside his life. They could manipulate reality itself. The game had just become lethal, and Michael was no longer a player. He was merely a piece being moved, being hunted. He had a lead, a desperate hope in Alex, but the Hydra had just shown him its true, terrifying face. He had to move now. He had to move now. The chilling realization that the safe house was a meticulously laid trap, a stage set for his elimination, hit Michael with a force that momentarily stole his breath. Emily's cryptic message, her sudden disappearance, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He wasn't just being investigated, he was being hunted, and the hunters played for keeps. The air in the supposedly secure apartment suddenly felt too thick, too heavy, pressing in on him. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old building a potential footsteps. He didn't waste another second. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging him to action. Grabbing only his worn leather messenger bag, which contained his laptop and the few incriminating documents he'd managed to compile, he moved with a primal urgency. He couldn't risk his phone, it was a beacon, a traceable leash. He tossed it onto the sofa, the screen still dark, a silent testament to his abrupt severance from his old life. He was a ghost now, or he needed to become one. The back exit, a fire escape rarely used, was his only hope. He descended the rusted metal steps, each clang echoing loudly in the suffocating silence of the night, feeling exposed, vulnerable. He reached the alleyway below, the stench of stale garbage and damp concrete filling his nostrils. He didn't look back. His instincts, honed by weeks of paranoia and the recent jolt of imminent danger, screamed at him to disappear, to vanish into the labyrinthine streets of the city. He ran, not a sprint but a desperate, weaving jog through the dimly lit backstreets, keeping to the shadows, his mind racing. He needed to contact Alex. Alex was the only one left, the only thread of hope he had. Alex, who had been the first to see the cracks in Daniel Miller's conviction, the first to truly listen. But how? He couldn't use his own devices. He needed to be untraceable. His eyes scanned the urban landscape, searching for an anachronism, a relic of a bygone era. A payphone. It was a long shot, but a necessary one. He walked for what felt like hours, his muscles aching, his mind a whirlwind of fear and grim determination. He passed pawn shops, late-night convenience stores, and finally, tucked away in a grimy corner near a deserted bus stop, he saw it. A battered, graffiti-scarred payphone. It was a miracle, or perhaps a cruel joke. He fumbled in his pockets, his fingers trembling as he found a handful of change. He punched in Alex's number, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The dial tone, then the ringing. Each ring was an eternity, a test of his dwindling hope. Finally, a groggy voice answered. "Hello. Alex, it's Michael. Don't say my name. Don't ask questions. Just listen." Michael's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper of its usual confident tone. A beat of stunned silence on the other end. Then Alex's voice, sharper now, laced with concern. "Michael? Where are you? Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you for days. Your office said you were on leave, but Emily just disappeared. Emily was part of it, Alex. Or she was used. The safe house, it was a trap. They knew. They're trying to kill me." The words tumbled out, raw and urgent. "They know everything. They're everywhere. Kill you." Alex's voice was incredulous, then tight with dawning horror. "Michael, what are you talking about? Who are they?" "The Hydra, Alex. The people behind Daniel Miller's conviction. Thompson, the judge, maybe even higher. It's bigger than we imagined. Much bigger. They're protecting something massive, and I stumbled into it." Michael leaned against the cold metal of the phone booth, his breath misting in the cool night air. "I need your help, Alex. You're the only one I can trust. Have you found anything else? Anything at all since we last spoke about Daniel?" Alex was silent for a moment, processing the bombshell Michael had just dropped. Then, his voice became low, conspiratorial. I knew something was wrong, Michael. When you stopped responding, when Emily vanished, I had a bad feeling. I kept digging quietly. I looked into Thompson's financial history, beyond the public records. It wasn't easy, but I found something. A pattern. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, all linked to a series of land acquisitions in upstate New York, near that proposed energy pipeline project. Michael's mind raced. The pipeline. Daniel's land was in the path of that pipeline. Thompson was pushing for it. "Exactly," Alex confirmed, his voice gaining urgency. "But it's not just the pipeline. These acquisitions, they all happened around the same time, about 5 years ago. And the shell corporations, they all lead back to a single obscure holding company called Viridia Group. It was dissolved 2 years ago, but the paper trail is still there if you know where to look. And here's the kicker: Michael, the registered agent for Viridia Group, the man who signed off on all these transactions, was a lawyer named Robert Sterling. He was a partner in a small, defunct firm that specialized in corporate mergers and acquisitions. That firm? It represented Senator Thompson's family trust for decades. Robert Sterling, Michael repeated, the name a new piece in the terrifying puzzle. And he's connected to Thompson. What about Daniel's land? Was it part of these acquisitions? Not directly, Alex clarified, but the surrounding parcels were. It's like they were clearing the way, buying up everything around Daniel's property, isolating it. And then Daniel gets arrested, accused of murder, and his land goes into receivership. Convenient, isn't it? A cold dread settled in Michael's stomach. More than convenient, Alex. It's a motive. They didn't just want Daniel's land. They wanted to send a message. Or perhaps, they wanted to remove a stubborn obstacle. There's more, Alex continued, his voice dropping even lower. I also looked into the judge presiding over Daniel's case, Judge Eleanor Vance. She has a clean record, spotless. But her husband, David Vance, he was a minority shareholder in one of the shell corporations linked to Viridia Group. A small percentage, easily overlooked, but it's there. He sold his shares just before Viridia Group dissolved. The pieces were falling into place, forming a horrifying picture of corruption and calculated malice. A judge, a senator, a network of shell corporations, all seemingly working in concert to acquire land and silence anyone who stood in their way. Daniel Miller was just collateral damage, a pawn sacrifice for a larger game. This is it, Alex, Michael whispered, his voice filled with a grim resolve. This is the proof, the motive, the connections. We need to expose this. But they're actively hunting me. I can't go to the police. They might be compromised too. I understand, Alex said, his voice firm. Look, I've been careful. I've been using a secure, encrypted network for my research. I haven't told anyone, but I think they're watching me too. My internet has been glitchy. I've noticed a strange car parked outside my apartment building a few times. I'm scared, Michael, but I'm not backing down. Not now. Good, Michael said, a flicker of hope igniting within him. We need to meet, but not at your place, not anywhere obvious. We need a dead drop, a secure location. Do you remember that old diner? The Midnight Grill? Near the courthouse? The one with the broken jukebox? We used to go there late nights when we were working on big cases. I remember it, Alex replied. Always empty after midnight. Good call. What time? 3 a.m. Tonight, Michael said, the urgency palpable in his voice. Come alone. Bring everything you have. And Alex, be careful. Assume everyone is watching. Assume they know. I will, Alex promised. And Michael, you too. Don't trust anyone. Not even shadows. The line went dead. Michael slowly hung up the receiver, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning intensity within him. He had a meeting, a desperate gamble. Alex had given him names, connections, a concrete path forward. Robert Sterling, Viridia Group, David Vance. These were threads he could pull, weak points in the Hydra's armor. But the relief was fleeting, quickly replaced by a surge of renewed fear. He was exposed, on the run, a target. He had no money, no identity, just the clothes on his back and a bag full of incriminating documents. Emily's betrayal, whether forced or willing, still stung. He had trusted her, opened up to her. Now he wondered if she was watching him even now, a pawn in their deadly game. Or if she too was a victim, silenced, disappeared. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through him. He couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had to focus. He walked away from the payphone, melting back into the urban night. The city, once a symbol of opportunity and justice, now felt like a vast, indifferent predator, its alleys and shadows providing both cover and potential traps. Every car that passed, every distant siren, every shadowy figure on the street sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He was a hunted animal, but he was also a lawyer, driven by a deep-seated belief in justice, a belief that had been shattered and now, paradoxically, was his only guiding star. He was no longer just trying to save Daniel Miller. He was fighting for his own life, and for the very idea that truth could still prevail, even against such overwhelming, insidious power. 3 a.m. The Midnight Grill. His last chance. The rain had intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof of Michael's car, as he pulled into the near-empty parking lot of the Midnight Grill. The neon sign, a flickering testament to a bygone era, cast a sickly green glow on the wet asphalt. He cut the engine, plunging the interior into a sudden, suffocating silence, broken only by the persistent drumming of the rain. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice in a game where the stakes were his life, Daniel's freedom, and perhaps the very soul of justice. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and stale exhaust. Doubts like venomous serpents coiled in his mind. What if this was a trap? What if the anonymous message was a ploy to lure him into the open? He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. No, he had to trust his gut. The same gut that had screamed at him for weeks that something was profoundly wrong with Daniel Miller's case. This was the only thread, however thin, that offered a glimmer of hope. Pushing open the heavy glass door, a blast of warm, greasy air enveloped him, carrying the scent of burnt coffee and frying onions. The diner was almost deserted. A lone waitress, her face etched with exhaustion, wiped down the counter. In a booth tucked away in the back, shrouded in shadow, a figure sat hunched over a steaming mug. Eleanor Vance, the name from the anonymous text. She was a former researcher for the city's environmental department, let go under mysterious circumstances months ago. Michael had tried to contact her before, but she'd vanished. Now here she was. He slid into the opposite side of the booth, the worn vinyl sighing under his weight. Eleanor looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot, darting nervously around the empty diner. She was pale, her usually neat hair disheveled, a stark contrast to the composed woman he remembered from old city council meeting videos. Fear clung to her like a shroud. "Thank you for coming, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't vital." "Eleanor, what's going on?" Michael leaned forward, keeping his voice low, a tremor of anticipation running through him. "The message, you said you had information about Daniel Miller's case. You said it wasn't what it seemed." She took a shaky sip of her coffee, her hands trembling. "It's far worse than you can imagine, Michael. Daniel, he's a pawn. A scapegoat." She paused, her gaze fixed on something unseen beyond the grimy window. "It goes all the way to the top, to Senator Richard Sterling." Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Richard Sterling, a titan of state politics, a man considered untouchable, with deep ties to corporate interests and an unblemished public image. This was a nightmare. Sterling? What does he have to do with Daniel Miller? Eleanor finally met his gaze, and in her eyes Michael saw not just fear, but a desperate plea for justice. Sterling has been secretly orchestrating a massive land deal in the outskirts of the city. A huge development, disguised as an eco-friendly industrial park. But it's a front. It's designed to funnel toxic waste from his industrial partners into the groundwater, contaminating a vast area, all while he profits immensely from the land value increase and the disposal fees. Michael's mind reeled. Toxic waste. Groundwater. This wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was an environmental catastrophe in the making. What does this have to do with the murder of that city councilman, Robert Maxwell? Maxwell was investigating it, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He got too close. He found out about the shell corporations, the falsified environmental impact reports, the bribes. He was going to expose Sterling at the next council meeting. He had proof. And Daniel Miller? Michael pressed. Why him? How does he fit in? Daniel worked for a small construction firm that Sterling's people contracted for preliminary site work. Daniel was meticulous, honest to a fault. He noticed irregularities in the soil samples, inconsistencies in the disposal manifests. He started asking questions quietly to Maxwell. He didn't know the full scope, but he knew enough to be a loose end. Eleanor wrung her hands. Sterling couldn't risk Maxwell going public, and he couldn't risk Daniel connecting Maxwell's death to the land deal. He needed a perfect fall guy, someone who was already on the fringes, someone whose past made him easy to discredit. A chilling realization washed over Michael. Daniel's history of petty crimes, his recent job loss, his struggle with addiction, all of it had made him the ideal target. They hadn't just framed him, they had selected him. But the evidence, Michael argued, trying to reconcile this with what he knew. The fingerprints, the surveillance, the eyewitness. Fabricated. Planted. Coerced, Eleanor stated flatly. The fingerprints were lifted from a tool Daniel used at the construction site weeks before, then placed on the murder weapon. The surveillance footage was doctored, digitally altered to show Daniel near Maxwell's house at the time of death. The eyewitness, Sarah Jenkins? She's Sterling's administrative assistant. She was paid a fortune, promised protection, and threatened into giving false testimony. Her initial statement to police before she was persuaded actually placed Sterling's chief of staff, Marcus Thorne, at the scene. Michael stared at her, utterly stunned. Marcus Thorne, Sterling's right-hand man. This was an elaborate, meticulously planned assassination and cover-up. The sheer audacity, the depth of the corruption was staggering. "How do you know all this, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice barely a rasp. She reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive. "Maxwell had a dead man's switch. He confided in me, knowing I was also suspicious of Sterling's projects. He gave me a key to his private server, told me to wait a week after his death, then access it. If anything happened to him, the truth would come out." She pushed the drive across the table. "This contains everything. Maxwell's research, his communications with Daniel, the real environmental reports, proof of the shell corporations, evidence of the bribes, even a confession from Sarah Jenkins, recorded by Maxwell on a hidden device when she tried to back out." Michael's fingers trembled as he picked up the USB drive. It felt impossibly light, yet it held the weight of lives, of a city's future, of justice itself. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I was terrified, Michael. After Maxwell, I saw what they did to him. I knew what they were capable of. I went into hiding. I encrypted the data, bought myself time. But I've been watching the trial. Seeing Daniel. Seeing you fight. I couldn't let an innocent man go down for this. And I couldn't let Sterling get away with poisoning our city." She looked utterly defeated, but a flicker of resolve burned in her eyes. "I've also sent a copy to a trusted journalist, a contact of Maxwell's, with instructions to release it if anything happens to me or to you. But you need to use it first. You need to clear Daniel and expose Sterling, before it's too late." "Too late for what?" Michael asked, a fresh wave of dread washing over him. "The final approval for the industrial park is scheduled for tomorrow's city council meeting," Eleanor revealed, her voice cracking. "If it goes through, the first shipments of waste begin next week. And Sterling has already put out a quiet bounty for anyone who tries to stop it. He knows I'm still out there. He's been looking for me." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The urgency of the trial, the rush to convict Daniel, the sudden escalation of threats against him. It all made sense. They needed Daniel convicted and out of the way before the land deal went through. If Michael exposed Sterling now, before the council meeting, he could stop it. But he would be putting a target squarely on his back. A target that Sterling's network, his chief of staff, Marcus Thorne, would undoubtedly act upon. He looked at the USB drive, then at Eleanor, whose face was a mask of exhausted terror. "Eleanor, you need to go somewhere safe. Disappear again. Now." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving until I know this is in the right hands. Until I know you have a plan." Michael knew he couldn't risk her any longer. He also knew he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. He had the truth, the irrefutable evidence. But how could he present it? The trial was nearing its conclusion. The prosecution had built an ironclad case, backed by the full corrupt might of Senator Sterling. If he simply presented this drive without a strategy, it would be dismissed, buried, and he along with it. He had to think fast. The city council meeting was tomorrow. The trial was tomorrow. Two converging timelines, two opportunities, and two immense risks. He couldn't just drop a bomb. He had to detonate it precisely, publicly, and in a way that guaranteed its impact in his and Eleanor's survival. Then a thought, cold and clear, cut through the panic. A Hail Mary. A desperate, dangerous gambit that might just work. It involved not just Daniel's defense, but a direct confrontation with the orchestrator himself. He would not just defend his client. He would prosecute the real killer, and the architect of the entire conspiracy, right there in open court. He looked at Eleanor, a grim resolve hardening his features. "I have a plan. It's risky, but it's the only way to ensure this truth sees the light of day. And to keep you safe." He scribbled down a number on a napkin. "This is a trusted contact. A private investigator. Go to him. Tell him I sent you. He'll get you out of the city, somewhere they'll never find you. Don't contact anyone else. Don't trust anyone." Eleanor nodded, relief flooding her face, mixed with lingering terror. She quickly took the napkin. "Be careful, Michael. Sterling is ruthless." "I know," he said, his voice firm, the fear replaced by a laser-like focus. He had faced down bullies in courtrooms before, but never one with the power of a senator. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a war. And he had just found his weapon. He watched Eleanor slip out of the diner, melting into the pre-dawn gloom. He was alone now, with the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket, a silent testament to the corruption that festered beneath the city's veneer. He had the truth, but truth alone wasn't enough. He needed to wield it with precision, with courage, and with a strategy so audacious it just might succeed. He had mere hours before the final day of the trial, before the city council meeting, before the point of no return. The game had just changed, and Michael was ready to play. The final act was about to begin. The final act was about to begin. The air in the courtroom that morning was thick with an almost unbearable tension. Every eye was on Michael as he rose for his closing argument, a quiet storm brewing behind his calm facade. He didn't walk to the podium immediately. Instead, he stood by the defense table, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle on everyone. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, yet resonated with an undeniable power. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his gaze sweeping across their faces, "you have heard the prosecution present a case built on convenience, not truth. You have heard them paint a picture of Robert Davies as a man driven by desperation, a man who they claim confessed to a heinous crime. But I ask you to look beyond the surface, beyond the carefully curated narrative, and consider what truly happened." He paused, then continued, his voice picking up a deliberate intensity. "They showed you a knife, a unique blade found near the scene. They told you it was Robert's. But what if that knife, with its distinctive hilt, was not a tool of random violence but a symbol of a deeper, darker truth, one that points not to my client, but to a web of power, greed, and ruthless ambition?" Michael turned to the prosecution table, his eyes briefly meeting the district attorney's, then moving to Mayor Thompson, who sat in the gallery, observing. "The prosecution has asked you to believe Robert Davies confessed. A man with no history of violence, no clear motive, suddenly admits to murder under duress. Ask yourselves why. Ask yourselves if the confession was freely given, or if it was extracted from a vulnerable man, desperate and alone, pressured to become a convenient scapegoat." He walked towards the jury box, his voice now a steady, compelling force. David Miller was not just a victim of a random act. David Miller was a man on the verge of exposing something monumental, something that threatened to unravel a carefully constructed edifice of corruption. He was investigating the proposed city development project, a project that promised immense wealth to a select few and ruin to many. He held the key, the original contract, which laid bare the fraudulent heart of the entire deal. A ripple went through the courtroom. Mayor Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Alderman Miller, seated nearby, visibly stiffened. "This original contract," Michael continued, his voice rising, "the prosecution has conveniently ignored its existence. They have focused solely on the missing knife, while the missing truth, the truth David Miller died trying to protect, has been buried. They want you to believe Robert Davies killed David Miller over a petty dispute. I tell you, David Miller was silenced because he knew too much. He was silenced by those whose power and fortunes depended on that corrupt deal going through. He was silenced by someone who stood to lose everything if that original contract ever saw the light of day." Michael's gaze landed squarely on Alderman Miller. "And that unique knife? The one found at the scene? It wasn't just a knife. It was a ceremonial blade, a family heirloom, passed down through generations of the Miller family. A blade that belonged not to Robert Davies, but to someone intimately connected to the victim, someone who knew David Miller's every move, someone who benefited most from his silence." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison hammered his gavel. "Order! Mr. O'Connell, you are bordering on speculation." "I am bordering on truth, Your Honor," Michael retorted, his voice unwavering. "The truth that has been suppressed, the truth that this court has been prevented from hearing." David Miller was murdered by his own brother, Alderman Richard Miller, because David had found the original contract, because he was about to expose the corruption, because he was about to bring down Mayor Thompson and his entire crony network. Chaos erupted. Alderman Miller sprang to his feet, shouting denials, his face a mask of rage and fear. Mayor Thompson's face was ashen. The district attorney was on his feet, protesting vehemently. "This is outrageous, Your Honor. Unsubstantiated accusations." "Unsubstantiated," Michael boomed, turning back to the jury, his voice cutting through the din. "I tell you, the original contract, the one that implicates Mayor Thompson and Alderman Miller in a multi-million-dollar fraud, is not gone. It has been hidden. But the truth, like water, finds its way. And at this very moment," he declared, pulling a small, encrypted USB drive from his pocket and holding it aloft, "its contents are being released to every major news outlet in this city, along with a sworn affidavit from a whistleblower detailing the entire conspiracy." He flung the USB drive onto the defense table. "The original contract, the one David Miller died for, proves that Alderman Miller was not just involved, but was the architect of the fraud, and when David threatened to expose him, he used his own family's ceremonial knife to silence him, then framed Robert Davies, knowing his brother, Mayor Thompson, would ensure the conviction." The courtroom was pandemonium. Reporters scrambled, phones flashed, security guards moved in. Alderman Miller, his composure shattered, made a desperate lunge towards Michael, screaming incoherent threats. He was immediately tackled by bailiffs. Mayor Thompson, pale and sweating, tried to slip out of the courtroom, but was intercepted by other officers, their eyes now fixed on him with suspicion. Just then, a loud, clear voice cut through the chaos from the back of the gallery. "He's telling the truth. I saw it all. I saw Alderman Miller threaten David. I saw him with that knife just days before." It was Sarah, David Miller's former assistant, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes burning with resolve. She held up her own phone, displaying a cached email, a digital breadcrumb left by David, detailing his fears and his brother's threats. The judge, initially stunned, quickly regained control, ordering the court into recess and ordering the immediate arrest of Alderman Miller and Mayor Thompson for obstruction of justice and conspiracy, pending further investigation into David Miller's murder. Robert Davies, numb with shock, was led away, but this time not to a holding cell but to freedom, his name cleared, his nightmare finally over. In the aftermath, the city was rocked to its core. The news of the exposed corruption, the mayor's involvement, and the alderman's fratricide spread like wildfire. The development deal was immediately halted. An independent investigation was launched, uncovering layers of graft and abuse of power that had plagued the city for years. Sarah's testimony, combined with the digital evidence Michael had released, proved irrefutable. Michael O'Connell, the lawyer who had once been on the brink of disbarment, was hailed as a hero. His audacious strategy, a gamble that defied every legal convention, had not only saved an innocent man but had brought down a corrupt regime. His name, once whispered with scorn, was now spoken with admiration and awe. He had risked everything, his career, his reputation, even his safety, not for personal gain, but for the principle of justice, for the truth. He stood outside the courthouse hours later, the setting sun casting long shadows. The crowd of reporters had thinned, but a few still lingered, hoping for more. He looked up at the grand old building, its columns seeming to stand taller, prouder. Justice, he mused, was rarely clean, rarely simple. Sometimes it required a little chaos, a little disruption, to pry open the dark corners where truth lay hidden. Robert Davies, now truly free, approached him, a tentative smile on his face. "Thank you, Michael," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life." Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "You're a good man, Robert. Go live your life." As Robert walked away, a new sense of purpose settled over Michael. The legal world was complex, filled with shadows and compromises. But he had found his calling. Not just to defend the innocent, but to expose the guilty, no matter how powerful, no matter how deeply entrenched. The fight for truth was never ending, but he was ready. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The lawyer who defended a guilty man had, in fact, freed an innocent one, and in doing so had redefined what it meant to seek justice. His journey was far from over. This was just the beginning.